For our final panel of the day, we have a number of distinguished experts from different nations that will take a look at the role of military space in international collaboration. So please welcome our moderator, the Space Foundation's Special Advisor for International Affairs, Mr. Bill Parker.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope everyone can hear us, and I'm glad you're willing to put up with what I believe is going to be one of the best panels that I've ever encountered at the Space Foundation or anywhere else. Let me briefly introduce these very experienced gentlemen. To my immediate right is Colonel Inaki Garcia Breton, the Chief of Staff, French Joint Space Command. He has served as Deputy Commander to the High Command of the Armed Forces in Guyana's Air Defense High Authority, and currently is the Chief of Staff for the Joint Space Command of the French Air Force. Bienvenue, Colonel.
Merci.
I would also like to introduce Herr Dr. Brigadier General Ansgar Rix, to my far left, Assistant Chief of Staff, Future Development Armed Forces, German Ministry of Defense. He served in various posts with the Ministry of Defense in Bonn, including the Division of Modernization Projects, the Branch Chief for Controlling Armaments Planning, and the Commander of the Weapons System Support Center. He is the head of Division Strategic Planning for the Federal Ministry of Defense, and one of the most interesting people I've spoken to in a very long time. To my immediate left, I feel as though I know him. He's been places where I've been, but he's much smarter than me. Major General Select Kevin McLaughlin, Director Space and Cyber Operations, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, Plans and Requirements, and behind that is also a really big brain person. He is currently PCS to Washington, D.C., where he's the Director of Space Operations and the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, Plans, and Requirements at the U.S. Air Force Headquarters in D.C., responsible for establishing and advocating policy guidance and resources for space operations and managing all that stuff. Welcome. To my far right, Sir Joe French. Joe is recently retired from the Royal Air Force after almost 40 years of service. Last appointment was in the MOD as the Chief of Defense Intelligence. His final tour was Commander-in-Chief, Strike Command, responsible for all of RAF's operational forces, including deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. In the past 4 years, he has taken up several advisory appointments with large corporations specializing in strategic planning and change programs. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm Bill Parker, the least experienced of all these gentlemen here, 31 years in the U.S. Foreign Service. My last overseas assignment was 3 years at U.S. Strategic Command in Omaha. And I am very pleased to be the chair of the International Military Collaboration for Security panel. I'm only going to take a few minutes because we want to hear what they have to say, not what I have to say. Irregardless of what is discussed in this Space Foundation environment, these people represent today where it all really matters. When we get down to where the warfighters live, where we move troops, where troops deploy, how we fight together, how we train together, how we use space, how we collaborate, and it is very difficult. And I learned that when I was served at STRATCOM. It is very difficult. The problems we have today, for me, surround 3 words: affordability, sustainability, and realism. And this is what these gentlemen have to deal with on a daily basis. The other problem we have today is for at least the second half of the 20th century, the U.S. enjoyed the stature and prosperity of levels seldom achieved in recorded history. Nobody had ever seen anything quite like it. It's not going to be that way for the next 10 or 15 years. Science and technology will be globalized. Individual nations and groups of nations will reach levels that were heretofore unheard of. They will be German, they will be French, they will be Russian, they will be Chinese, there will be others. We need to maintain a collaborative relationship, a collaborative spirit. We need to join hands, or else we will find ourselves as coalition partners coming in last. We're going to explore collaboration from the strategic level to the operational level, tactical level, how we collaborate in space, how is it relevant in the new structures? Do we have to restructure how we view defense, how we review spending in order to collaborate, in order to use the diminishing resources that we know don't exist? I'd like to start off the presentations today with Colonel Breton. À vous, Colonel.
Merci, Bill. Good afternoon. I'm Colonel Garcia Breton, French Joint Space Command Chief of Staff. And I'm very pleased to give you a quick review of the French perspective on international military collaboration for security. First of all, on behalf of Major General Arnaud, Commander, French Joint Space Command, who could not attend this event, I would like to thank the Space Foundation, especially the distinguished Elliot Poulan and its outstanding team, for organizing the 28th National Space Symposium, the worldwide reference for our space community. I'm very honored to participate in such a panel with such distinguished speakers. It is in fact the third participation of the French Space Command at the National Space Symposium. Primarily, there are three main reasons that justify international collaboration on space, and I'm not going to present them by order of importance. The first reason is historically the need to preserve space environment, to establish a dialogue between nations and to ensure spacefaring nations freedom of access to space for peaceful purposes. It is the reason why France is committed in United Nations committees on space and supports the European Union proposal for an international code of conduct related to space activities. The second reason is that collaboration enables development of capabilities unaffordable for a single nation like France. The sharing of financial burden has become a trigger for space program. Besides the broader collaboration at a bigger scale, even allows us to create initiatives to respond to global challenges like navigation, weather forecast, or space surveillance. The third reason to collaborate on space is that we always have to strengthen our partnerships by enhancing interoperability, trust, and confidence. As far as governmental assets are concerned, we have access to different kinds of capabilities. First, autonomous, state-owned. Second, shared with other nations. And third, based on cooperation. This capability may be used at national or coalition levels of engagement, and that can be involved in three types of alliances: bilateral defense agreements, European Union, and NATO. So now I'm going to go more into details with regard to these three collaboration frameworks. We have been collaborating in military and security space for years. The most representative example may be the Optical Satellite Observation Program, HELIOS. The HELIOS community of 6 European nations is the owner of the system. And usually, access to capability is proportional to the investment devoted by each partner. But in case of necessity, one nation can accept that the most committed nations temporarily increase their capability access. A counterpart of collaborating on HELIOS is an access for France to radar imagery through bilateral collaboration with Germany and Italy. SATCOM's partnership has been operational for more than 20 years with the UK and has also recently become programmatic with Italy. Collaboration on SSA is based on national assets and political statements, both with the US and Germany at different levels. We are currently in a more operational implementation phase, but I'm not going to go into that kind of details today. The European Union has set up a new political framework with regards to space as a shared competency between EU and member states. Civil collaboration is led by the European Commission and is represented by two flagship programs, the Global Navigation Satellite System Galileo and the Global Monitoring Satellite System for Environment and Security, GMES. These are two civil systems under civil control funded by civil budgets, but with security implications. Then on the military side, collaboration stakes are clearly to support of correct handling of security rules and regulations, and in support of the right to use these systems for military purposes without political constraints. In this domain, like in many others, to keep it stupid simple, the aim is efficiency. And when an available civil system helps to gain military superiority, then we must use it. As security is one of the major concerns in European SSA, either on EU or on ESA side, it is likely that member states will be more involved as nations in the near future. This is the main rationale for the Franco-German collaboration on this topic. My description would not be complete without adding that, according to the European treaties, the EU cannot own military assets. Thus, when the use of military assets is required in a EU-led operations, then member states have to provide the operation with national or multinational military space assets. Can I have the next slide, please?
Slide malfunction.
Right.
Continue.
Continue. Let's now consider NATO. The alliance is political, but the right level of consideration for space is operational. As a matter of fact, space enhances efficiency and security for deployed warfighters, and it is legitimate for NATO to optimize the use of available space services by forces operating under its command. But NATO does not own space assets. They belong to the nations. When an operation is decided by NATO, space-capable nations provide the alliance with services that are derived from their own capability, national capability in support. This is the general framework, quite like the EU one. Space capability are rare resources for us, and they are simultaneously dedicated to different kinds of operations, which can be national or allied. That's why, during NATO operations, space assets remain under the national chain of command. The national level is the only one able to decide where, when, and how space resources can be employed. This is our way to give maximum flexibility for efficiency to our space assets. Another way to provide NATO with space services is the one based on contracts. We have an example for SATCOM bandwidth with NATO SATCOM post-2000 contract involving British Skynet, French Syracuse, and Italian SICRAL satellite communication national systems. I wouldn't conclude my presentation without adding a few words about what I consider beneficial principles for a good collaboration. Collaboration is based on trust, balance, and mutual benefits. Trust means that we are sharing a common vision. Balance means that we are sharing the burden, and in order to be a credible partner, each one must offer a significant participation. Mutual benefits means that nobody is involved in a partnership to found the counterpart, and nobody is involved to be under the influence of the others. When you are involved in an international collaboration, you must get what you expect to receive. That's what is necessary to create a successful cooperation. And the best way to add value to cooperation is to bring valuable capability or assets. Thank you for your attention.
Je vous remercie, Colonel. Herr Dr. Rix.
Yeah, first slide, please. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very grateful for the invitation to the Space Conference here at Colorado Springs and the opportunity to attend this panel. And a special thanks to Bill Parker for organizing this international panel in such a, let's say, cooperative way as we did it before here. Germany, and in particular the Bundeswehr, very much appreciates this symposium's approach to find further opportunities for international collaboration in terms of space and security. As I saw yesterday from some briefings, a state-of-the-art briefing has a video. Unfortunately, I do not have a video just presenting slides, but I can promise you these slides are brand new. So next one. Eventually you could, from the regie, take the next slide. Yeah, here, okay. So before I go into details, I'd like to take the opportunity to offer you a brief introduction into the German reform of the Bundeswehr and the way we tackle the challenges we have. It is not self-explanatory. So to say, it's brand new. We have changed our MOD structure 1st of April, so it's 14 days running. But we have, of course, the concepts and the processes, and it has to be explained a little bit more in detail. It is rather to give you some background information about the rationale behind the reform of the Bundeswehr and the German armed forces. And I'd like to show you this photo on the slide, which I took in East Germany a few years ago for comparison. The reform we do is not about building a futuristic style house, nor it is about keeping an old facade. It is about building a mission and future-oriented force in a multinational alliance, framework capable and equipped with a broad capability spectrum. And it is about building a house in which we can live for some years, and especially as long as possible. So the reorientation of the Bundeswehr is at the same time a challenge and an opportunity. It changes the whole Bundeswehr, and first time we begin from the top. So the MOD was the first change. Additionally, we have to close the gap between tasks and resources, of course, as it is also here. And this does not mean to do more with less, but to concentrate on the most relevant tasks. And I'm sure you all couldn't agree more that this also has something to do with space. So the aim of our reorientation is to improve operational capabilities where needed and possible to make us more efficient and more robust. And 4 major reasons shown on the slide triggered the reorientation of the Bundeswehr. On the political side, we have NATO's new strategic concept, putting emphasis on collective defense as it hasn't been before in the same way, including against new threats to the safety of our citizens. And given a stable security situation in Europe, the familiar understanding of reconstitution is obsolete. This is a major point for Germany, as you can imagine. Protection against new threats cannot be achieved by rebuilding conventional capabilities we have reduced in the past, but by making our forces more expeditionary. Thus, we have abolished, and this was a major political topic, our conscription system in the middle of 2011, completing our transformation in an all-volunteer force. This alone would have been reason enough for a complete reform of the Bundeswehr, as you can imagine. But additionally, we analyzed that change is needed for a number of practical reasons. Most prominently, there is a long list of lessons learned from recent operation of the Bundeswehr. To mention only one, we identified a strong need to be more flexible in our force generation. We had to adjust our assumptions about the character of different types of operations. And this also means including space. In the future, we will organize our forces in a more modular and escalation-capable way. This is a prerequisite also in preparation for new operational challenges that may lie ahead of us. And finally, we have to take into account, of course, the resource situation. This applies not only to budget, as some of you might think, but especially also to people. We have to define realistic expectations concerning the number of personnel we realistically will be able to recruit in the given demographic situation in Germany. So, we have started the reorientation of the Bundeswehr from the top with a completely new organization of the MOD, and the MOD is reduced from 3,300 people to 2,000 until the end of March, so we started in 1st of April. The service chiefs left the MOD structure and now are subordinated to the Chief of Defense. And along with this, the services command structures are going to be focused on the respective missions and tasks. So in the future, we will have 5 new services commands for the Army, the Air Force, and Navy, the Joint Support Service, and the Medical Service, and a Joint Operations Command for command and control of the Bundeswehr missions abroad is subordinate directly under the JOT. The former joint staff has been dissolved. Instead, 3 ministerial directorates were created under the JOT: plans, defense plans and policy, which I'm a member of, military forces policy, and strategy and operations. And additionally, there will be much closer integration between military and civil departments within the MOD in subordinated commands and other higher agencies, with the effect to enhance the operational mindset of the whole Bundeswehr. And this is a major event in Germany, as you might imagine. And looking to the numbers, in order to select qualified people, we need a sufficient number of candidates, of course. To maintain the envisioned force strength of up to 185,000 military personnel, we must continuously convince more than every 10th young male or female in our country to apply for military service. And this is a question of attractiveness and money, as you can imagine. This is a challenge of its own, requiring an improved level of attractiveness in comparison, especially with the civil labor market, which is just well off in Germany in these months and years. And it's a tough job in a framework of a continuously decreasing birth and unemployment rate in Germany. And let me be very frank about one point. Unlike sometimes possibly suggested, from our point of view, it will not be possible to do more with fewer resources. The only way to get more relevant output is to reduce irrelevant activities, structures, and even more multilateral sharing and pooling, what we also discuss here on this panel. So we are convinced that the actual challenges can only be overcome by even closer multilateral collaboration. And to my observation, most synergies will not be produced by big and huge programs which we cannot afford, but by multi and eventually trilateral minor activities which have to begin in every rearm. So the national level of ambition was published in May 2011 as a part of our new defense policy guidelines. In general, the Bundeswehr will permanently provide up to 10,000 military personnel for sustained international crisis management and crisis preventive operation. And in addition to this, of course, we have some forces for our hostage release operations outside Germany for capabilities for surveillance and security in Germany airspace and territorial waters, including search and rescue services, and of course, in addition, our participation with NATO response forces and EU battle groups. Our forces will cover the whole military capability spectrum, including possible escalation up to high-intensity warfare. And saying this, of course, NATO remains the core of our national defense precautions. The restructuring process is closely oriented along NATO's strategic concept and the political guidelines. So the new German level of ambition I mentioned calls for a high agile and flexible forces equipped with high technology means. And therefore today it is inconceivable to conduct a military operation without space assets involved. We heard this a lot of times in this conference, and this is also valid, of course, for the German armed forces. In Germany, the use of outer space was for a long time linked with science fiction, astrophysics, and high technology scientists. Of course, it still is. But in recent decades, we have shown us that we are heavily dependent from space-based services and applications on the civil, either on the military side. So from satellite communications to mapping and space-based ISR gathering, there is virtually no gear in a modern military machine which would turn without a satellite being somewhere involved. And in line with that, strategic defense planning, as I'm responsible for, is one of the most important tasks to fill the gaps between future requirements, capabilities, and resources. And this is the reason why planners, as myself, are at the forefront of discussing space topics in these days, and especially at this conference here. Oh, I'm back. But this dependence is in no way limited to the military, of course. Space has already reached all aspects of everyday life, military or civilian, from traffic management to the flow of money, goods, and information. And as a soldier, I'd like to highlight that security encompasses both civil and military security issues. And in these days, especially looking to Europe, eventually also money. We have to keep this in mind, as a lot of space-based services and applications are inherently so-called dual use or dual nature. Thus, the understanding that we need to safeguard against any disruption or use of space-based applications has become common sense in Germany. To this end, in 2010, Germany published the first national space strategy. And one central answer to the pressing questions arising with our dependence on space that we define in this policy is indeed multilateral cooperation. Already today, there are major elements of the military space program of the Bundeswehr which are part of a fabric of bi- and multinational cooperation, as was already pointed out also by France. This holds even true for the usually suspiciously guarded field of military Earth observation. And the reason for this need to cooperate is not only the immense costs attached, it is also costs, but also it is motivated by a lot of other aspects, I admit. It is the simple realization of various tasks we simply cannot shoulder alone, no matter what our budgetary situation is like. So the Germany's national space strategy aims to use space to address key global challenges, and in doing so to exploit the economic potential to the utmost possible. Germany's national space strategy aims to use space to address these four key global challenges on the slide. First, it is globalization, as you might already have heard here. So the security of worldwide goods traffic is essential in a distributed global economy characterized by mutual dependencies. Secondly, knowledge society. Knowledge is for a country short of raw materials such as Germany a strategic resource. And you can imagine that science and research from the basis of technical innovation are thus a source for our country which is enormously important, and we have to care of it. It is a decisive advantage to always remain one step ahead through innovation and knowledge as we seek to defend our position in the competition of the rest of the world. Climate change, preserving essential natural resources and global change is a topic which was already discussed here and pretty clear when it comes to global challenges and space assets. And national security, Germany's security policy environment has undergone substantial change in recent years. We were at the very borderline between East and West inside our country, and you can imagine what that meant. So while previous threats to Germany and its citizens may have receded, Germany must now join forces with its allies and partners to confront a new set of global risks and challenges. And this calls for a coordinated network security approach that encompasses all means available to the state and also includes the participation of non-governmental agencies and actors in some cases. And finally, a perfect example in this case could be the space situational awareness. So I'm sure that all of us here are aware of the threats we are facing with regard to the vulnerability of our space-based assets. And they range from natural occurrences to unintentional and even intentional man-made interferences, and even go as far as cyberspace. We had the first day of the conference, the Cyber Day, and it was very interesting for us to watch and to hear what happens over there and what was discussed. Bottom line is, we are dependent on space-based assets and we have to protect them. But as prerequisite, we need to know what is actually happening in the outer space, which makes the case for space situational awareness, as mentioned before. And for us, it's very clear that we need to tackle this problem in an international cooperation, and it is possible, especially possibly with the country sitting here at the table. So, Germany has useful capabilities, expertise, and assets, and so have our partners and allies. In Germany, for example, we are currently building up a national space situational awareness center in an interagency approach with military and civilian staff members from different governmental authorities. And linking such national nodes should be the basis for a European and possibly a future global operational capability among like-minded nations. And to show you a picture of a network which we have in mind, you see this German-French existing cooperation concerning SSA. The network could include, of course, the US and other institutions, nations, and especially the EU. So from a German point of view, this could also be the blueprint for future developments in an international context. However, this is not already fixed. Therefore, the Bundeswehr has already undertaken to establish a close cooperation with the US in respect to military use of outer space, and the Luftwaffe in particular in terms of SSA. All these aspects lead to my conclusions. We all know that budget constraints, sensitive information, strategic economic interests, and technologies call for certain limits and roles to international collaboration. These rules and limits should be subject to consultation, as we began possibly here at the Space Conference, among like-minded nations. However, the use of outer space gives us an advantage and possibilities, and we can and we could and we should use them. So having said this, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to our discussion later on.
Major General Kevin McLaughlin, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Thanks to the Space Foundation and Bill, thank you for organizing this great panel, and to the panelists. It's a pleasure to talk about a topic that I am excited about. And I'm excited about it because coalition space operations we're in a phase, it's an exciting phase where we're moving from talking about it to doing it. This conference is an example of that, but what I'd like to do just for a few minutes is to, even though it's embryonic, is to talk a little bit about definitionally what I think it is, kind of offer a working definition, why it's important, why we are pursuing it on the U.S. side, and give you some examples and some insight to what we're actually doing right now and where I think we're headed. So I'll start with the definition. This is just a kind of a working definition that we are using in our government, but I'd offer it up to you. Combined space operations are military activities that strengthen deterrence, improve mission assurance and resilience, while optimizing resources across partner nations. I think pretty consistent with even some of the concepts that you've heard described already. But that's a very concise definition of what we're focused on right now. We're not talking about all international cooperation in space. We've got long-standing research and development and science and technology and other areas where we cooperate between nations. This is focused on those military activities between allied partners. Why is it important? Why are we now focused on this even though it's been discussed for a while? We've been looking at this over a number of years in war games. You might have heard about the Shriver series, where we've learned in the current strategic environment, cooperating with coalition members in the space environment proved to be key to an outcome in those scenarios. What was key was that we cooperated and shared data. The strategic environment is such where space, and you probably have heard it multiple times in this symposium, is contested, competitive, and congested. That's just a fact of life. And our national space policy and our national security space strategy call out as one of the centerpieces for implementation that we will look at and determine how to implement coalition space operations within our own government, and we're off doing that right now. But some specifics as to why it's important. I'd like to offer up a few of those because I think they're tangible. We're not doing it just because we like to travel to each other's countries. We're not doing it just because we think having agreements is important. We're doing it because it's important to our nations. And I'll give you some examples. First, this is going to allow us to synchronize military operations. We already participate as coalition members around the world in other domains. Space is now linked inextricably with military operations in those domains, and it makes sense for us to cooperate in space to the same degree that we do in the air, land, and the sea. So those expanded cooperation, improved communication, those strengthened ties are important. We aren't just limiting this to space situational awareness. In fact, General Reich's chart showed multiple mission areas, and we believe that's key. So space object identification, spectrum characterization, launch and reentry assessment, joint and coalition force enhancement, and contingency operations are all areas that we believe would be open to where cooperating as a coalition in space would lend itself to better operations across that entire spectrum. We also believe, though, that our partnership and our cooperation will lend itself to increased mutual security. That's the reason the definition has the word deterrence, but it also will help us with mutual security and the ability for all of us to respond to new challenges in space. There are new ones today, and there will be new ones in the future. I'd like to give you one example of one of those just recently. You probably read about the Phobos Grunt probe that was launched and did not go to Mars and ended up re-entering back into the Earth's atmosphere. It was a large satellite, had lots of propellant on board, and it generated a lot of interest around the world in all of our countries about where was it going to come in, what were the hazards associated with it, and we treated that in a way that we had not done before. First of all, inside the U.S., we created a collaboration across the U.S. government, civil and military, and our entire community to share data in a way that we hadn't before. But we also began to share data, including our most highly accurate tracking data on that object with many of the countries in this room that we had not done before, or we had not had permission to do it. But we got permission from our leadership We shared that information in a two-way arrangement with countries that had also tracking data available. And as that reentry got closer, we all had shared awareness of when we thought it would come in. And when the reentry actually occurred, what I thought was very interesting on the U.S. side of things is the first confirmation we had of its reentry came not from one of our own sensors, but actually came from the radar at Groves. And so you may not think that's a sexy example, but it's a practical example of the kinds of things that occur every day in the space environment that if we operated as a coalition, they would become matter of fact. So what are we doing to make this real within the current leadership? We really embarked about a year ago with a very focused effort to actually begin to get to a concept that we could begin to discuss with our coalition partners and try to decide whether we would reach an agreement to begin to operate as a coalition. Back in early February of this year, we started a 6-month activity that we call the Period of Discovery for Coalition Space Operations, where we're beginning to explore the exact day-to-day operational concepts and constructs that would be required for coalition members to interact on a daily basis, to share information, to share awareness about what's going on in space, to cooperate for operations that are occurring terrestrially, and to begin to uncover what are the obstacles that we have to overcome. A lot of the times it's just lexicon, it's procedures. A significant issue is data sharing, because all of us are arranged differently. We have different ways that our governments organize for space, and it's very complicated, like any coalition, to work through how you would operate. Even if you had 2 countries alone, that alone can be something that's difficult. When you get multiple countries, like in any coalition, it gets complicated, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't go do it. So we're in the middle of this period of discovery now, and it'll end in the summer, and our intent is to take the results from that, assess what we think to be true intuitively is that this is important, and then begin to move forward with what would be a decision, at least I think within all the governments that might be part of it, as to whether this is something that we would want to move forward with formally. And so from our perspective, these are tangible steps that we're taking now to kind of go from the talking about to the doing in coalition space operations. I would like to note there is no formal decision any place, I think in any government, certainly not in ours, to do this officially. That is going to be done and negotiated somewhere above me. But I would just say I'm enthusiastically optimistic that that's the outcome that we're headed towards. We do have a lot of work to do, especially in again, areas that you may not think are that important, but how we share data that previously has been viewed as we can't share it, how we work through those procedures so that we can synchronize our activities on those things that we agree on, and we still have the flexibility for us each to go do those things that we need to do individually as nations. Just because it's hard, go talk to any coalition member today and around the world, and they will tell you it's as hard as it is, it's well worth it in those areas, and it's worth it here. So I'll stop talking, because I would love to get some of your questions before the end of the day, and certainly welcome them, and I look forward to the next presentation.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to be slightly unfair to Sir Joe French, because I've heard him actually speak, and I know he moves rather quickly, and I also know he can add a little vinegar to this oil party.
If I could
Sir
say,
Joe.
first, thank you very much, and great honor to actually be here today. If I could just say at the beginning, though, that I am now ex-military, so I've gone from being gamekeeper to poacher, so I'm not actually putting the UK national view here. I think, as you've heard already, that collaboration exists, and what I would like to just, sort of, on my few comments, is say that whilst I share the enthusiasm we've all got to have for this, we've got to be realistic, as Bill said at the beginning, about how we take this forward. I was interested yesterday in General Formica's presentation where he talked of assured supply, assured access to intelligence, data, information, whatever you want to call it. I would add to that, and it's come out already, security has got to be key, as also has timeliness. I think when we talk of global interests, I think we have to be very honest with each other that that doesn't necessarily manifest itself in the same military objectives or commitments. So when you're looking at collaboration, I think inevitably you're going to end up with clubs within clubs, whether you like it or not, and they will vary, like it or not, from situation to situation, from different parts of the globe to different parts of the globe. That brings me back to really that I think every country is left with the difficult task, particularly when you're looking at resources being constrained, of what is the sovereign requirement. Now, when you start trying to articulate sovereign requirement, and this has just been touched on in the previous presentation, that is not terribly easy when you're trying to bring a whole government's interests together. How do you square the military capability with soft power, for instance? If you look at government departments, many of them, if you mention space, the default position generally is towards the Defense Department. They deal with space, they'll sort that out. And there's this feeling, I think because of the internet and just the way we live now, that information, particularly space-derived information, is a free good that someone delivers from somewhere, forgetting that you've got to think about what it is, particularly the balance between both the military requirements and what satisfies our civilian needs. And another factor to throw in this equation is when you're looking at the security spectrum, I mentioned soft power, but when you look at the UK national security policy, you're into issues such as failed states, where do you get minerals from, desertification, where is water coming from in the future, all issues that can actually put to the security or come to a security spectrum, which is difficult to actually rationalize even internally with countries before you try to actually put that in some sort of collaborative framework. And if you let's take the UK, for instance, we rather forget how crucial space is to critical national infrastructure. We also conveniently forget that critical national infrastructure, probably 80% plus, I'm taking the UK example, actually is in the private sector hands. But if it goes wrong, then the guano tends to stick with the government rather than with the private sector. So there's an awkwardness there again in actually coming up with what is the actual sovereign capability. If we could get a very clear crystal ball on that, then we're looking at several shades, I would suggest, of collaboration. Is it straight information sharing? Is it getting into industrial capabilities? And I think it has to do with you're actually getting the best of what is coming from the industrial base across the world rather than just in the US. But as I've heard in other presentations, that sometimes is going to get some political neuralgia, not least because you're going to end up with several companies going to the wall. There's going to be rationalization of a whole lot of things that very difficult to actually sell politically, not particularly if you go this year and say an election year, going for collaboration, and we're actually going to give a certain number of dollars to another country to actually provide our capability, a difficult message to actually put across. So I'm left with, yes, I'm very much for collaboration, but I think the realism that we talked about, getting the balance, taking my present interests between large and small, if you're looking at satellites, where is that balance of investment that we actually take? But we are going to have to make sure that we can get people to truly actually address the sovereign capability and how we actually spread out from that into international collaboration.
Very good. Since we're quickly running out of time, I'm going to send questions over to the two gentlemen at the other side of the podium. And they have to do with sharing of a capability. And Dr. Reeks, you have several capabilities, TerraSAR, TX2 coming, that are state-of-the-art, made available. How do we share those between the United States, Germany, France, and the UK? How do you make that available to them?
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is nearly in the core of the discussion, how to share responsibilities and capabilities especially. Of course, building up capabilities is first of all a national business. And capabilities is hardware, software, money, affordability, as you told us before, sustainability and realism. And we try to keep up so to say, a complete capability spectrum. That means, on the other hand, that we have to care also about tanks, aircraft, and all the rest, besides, of course, space assets. And you should keep in mind that it's a major event to bring this all in the medium-term planning. So, nevertheless, we try to engage and to bring up national capabilities and to share it with our partners. So the question is how to share. Yeah.
Within 3 minutes.
First of all, I mean, sharing capabilities is building up trust, because we have to bring capabilities together between the nations. And capabilities are national-owned capabilities in most cases, besides some of NATO. So this trust is cooperation concerning data exchange, and eventually a mutual education and training. So this would be the first step, as I see, and I'm very, very thankful that especially you, Chief Marshal French, have pointed out that it has to be realistic. Realism means that we have to take the first step first and the second step as a second step. But nevertheless, in my opinion, we should keep in mind that without visions and a goal, a first step couldn't be made. So we should keep in mind when it comes to operations, and this was especially your part, General McLaughlin, so that we should prepare in the long hand strategically for, let's say, exchanging data, or eventually also for conducting common space operations, but this will be then in the past.
Thank you. General McLaughlin, are we in a position, do we have the structures to receive that exchange of data?
I would say, actually, probably today, no. To actually receive sort of data-to-data connections. I think we have the ability, I mentioned Phobos Grunt, where we did it manually. We did it over the phone. But I think to get there, using just the example you laid out, we first would have to agree on a set of activities that we wanted to do that were common. That might be sharing SSA data to enhance safety on orbit, and be jointly aware of activities in orbit, or to protect our assets, or to support the military operations of our countries. We'd have to agree first on why, and then I think everyone would have to agree to bring their resources and capabilities to the basket of overall capabilities. And if you could get those two things done, then you can work the technical, I think, details about how do you actually share the data, how do you connect the systems, how do you use them in some cooperative way. But if you don't do the first two, and come up with those practical, why am I doing this, and do we have common objectives, I don't think you ever get to actually how you use each of their systems.
Thank you. Colonel Breton and Sir Joe, given the number of European institutions, defense and economic structures, is there a role for the European Space Agency in the development of defense-related space systems?
ESA is not involved in development of defense systems. And in European treaties, the Commission is not involved in defense assets. It's a responsibility of each member state and on the Conseil, the meeting of all the chiefs of government, and not the Commission with leading the civil branch, and ESA, who is not an EU institution.
Je vous remercie. Joe, given the politics of the international bodies, is there an unofficial and formal mechanism to derive benefit from the state-of-the-art technologies of an ESA?
Of ESA specific?
Correct, specifically.
Yes, but I think, as was said here, you end up, there's no European handle on defence as such. There are security mechanisms, but if you're looking for the sharing of information, and from having been head of defence intelligence, then we had a very strong one-to-one relationship with the French. We had a very strong one-to-one relationship with the Germans and with others. And you're really left, unless you use elements of NATO with European forces with it. If you're going solely for European forces at the moment, you would have to come up with some sort of solution that would work on what are, to all intents, bilateral arrangements at the moment to actually satisfy that particular coalition activity. And it would vary from coalition to a coalition, as we found with practically with Libya, with Afghanistan, and a whole range of other operations.
Thank you. General McLaughlin, not to put you on the spot, but are there a series of exercises that we're considering that would pressure and help us train in space collaboration?
Well, I'll mention there's an Air Force Space Command sponsored war game just actually going to start next week. That is the Shriva war game will be in two parts this year, but the first one is focused on NATO and coalition is sort of the centerpiece of the focus of that, and so we're in the middle of doing that right now, and I think the next step would probably be out of war games but into exercises, which are a little bit closer to current capabilities, and I think that would probably be the next set of things we would begin to do in an exercise scenario, like we used to do broad NATO exercises, for example, Reforge or others. Would we begin to bring space capabilities into that environment and begin to exercise and practice? You still have to have those first set of things, but yeah, Shriva's a great example of something starting.
Thank you. Sir.
Yeah, could I eventually add a little bit to your question? Is there a function for ESA? So the European approach. You could also ask the question, is there a function for NATO, for example, for the European Union? So bring it into a broader sphere. In my opinion, of course, there is a function and there is an element and a necessity for these organizations. If we are looking into our own nation, we have different ministries responsible for different tasks. We have companies bringing out technology, for example. We have military spheres and military assets. So of course every single element, so to say, especially also when it comes to Europe or to NATO or to international collaboration, has its function in a certain way of amount, but we have to orchestra these different things, yeah, to bring it to a table. And we cannot afford to duplicate assets, to duplicate military installations or capabilities. And in so far, from a military standpoint, of course, this collaboration inside a nation with all these agencies, with the European Union, with NATO, and with other partners is of a huge amount and is very necessary. But we have to think about how to do this.
We're into the speed round now. We have 2 minutes, 11 seconds. We have coalition partners, friendly nations. We have concept of operations. How do we collaborate with non-traditional states like India and China? Sir, you're first.
Me first?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Kevin.
I think we first have to, in my opinion, I think we have to realize that, just like just was discussed, the world's so complicated today, you could just pick a standard ground operation. You've got diplomatic, military, intelligence, NGOs, all mixed together in that environment. It's the same in space. We cooperate with those other countries. We all are organized differently. We all get capabilities from different parts of our government. And I think if you begin to say, I'm going to exclude those that perhaps are organized differently or maybe or even aligned differently, I think you're going to undershoot the potential of what you could do. So I think you have to be open to countries just like what you described. They're a key part of the environment. We are working closely with them in other areas.
Very good.
To make a statement up front that we wouldn't include them in this discussion or dialogue, I think would be a mistake.
Joe?
I would think that in this context we're talking about military, but I would suggest that if you're talking of countries in the Far East, you're actually talking of industrial collaboration and giving them a capability which they use for their own military purposes. But certainly intelligence relationships go on a one-to-one basis with many of those countries as a matter of course anyway.
Thank you. Colonel Breton?
I think everybody says here, it's difficult to make collaboration. So we have to build step by step, and it's
Doucement.
yes, and we have to consolidate NATO collaboration, EU collaboration, and then collaboration with other countries in other parts of the world.
Je vous remercie. Herr Dr. Rix?
Yeah, I think especially when it comes to coalitions, it needs two things. It needs trust to its partners, and it needs a positive approach. So I'm very thankful to have heard this positive approach in general here at the conference quite often, so that there is a certain kind of openness for discussing all these topics. We will not be able to do a coalition or warfighting or a cooperation if you force somebody into a special system. So we all have our systems and we have to combine them. And of course, decision finding inside our nations is very difficult, and in some cases it takes time. But we need to do it. But we also have to convince inside our nations and with our partners that this positive approach will be beneficial for us all. And from this perspective, I think this is a positive approach coming out from here.
Thank you. We have about a minute left. And I believe, if my brain serves me well, on the 5th or 3rd of March, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, Secretary General of NATO, will meet in Chicago for their summit, and all of the countries represented on this panel will have a leading voice in the future of that institution as we ponder, as he calls it, smart defense. And I am sure Colonel Breton would have some various views on smart defense. But I'd like to thank all of you for educating me, and I hope we were able to educate and engage the audience as much as you've enlightened me. I'd just like to say that the future of collaboration in space for me is equal to our collaboration as nations, our collaboration as NGOs, PVOs, warfighters, and sovereign states, and it's something that we have to use as the overarching engagement solution. I want to thank you for coming to the Space Foundation. Thank you for supporting this effort, and thank you for leading a great panel. Give them a round of applause, please. Thank you, Sir Jeff. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, for leading a great discussion on this really critically important topic. So this does conclude today's official program. Please enjoy this evening's hospitality night with activities throughout the Broadmoor, I think starting within the hour. And we're excited to see you tomorrow morning for the final day of the 28th National Space Symposium. Thank you.